all of those things that signified what would become the death of the comic industry at that time.
I'm seeing happen in records.
Hey, what's up? This is Carlos from Hybrid Records, and I'm here to talk about the vinyl bubble burst, the end of the vinyl comeback potentially. I don't know. I had some thoughts on my drive to work, and I decided that I was going to scrap the video that I was going to do this week to talk about this. So let's just get straight into it. Alright, so a little background into what spurred this thought, and it stems from the time that I worked in a comic book shop when I was in college. I worked at a few different ones, but there was one where I was like actually working behind the counter and not just like doing shipping and receiving stuff. And one of the things that I remember the most about that time was, this would have been the early 2010s, so like 2012-ish, I want to say, so about 10 years ago. Avengers came out that year, but the Marvel Cinematic Universe hadn't become the behemoth that it is today, so all of that for context. But I remember when people would come in to sell us their comic collection, the way people come and sell record collections into record stores, 9 times out of 10, people were like, oh, I've got all of these books, these rare books, and they came in and it was all stuff from the 90s and it was all worthless. Same happened with sports cards. There was this big boom for collectibles in the 90s, and so every comic book issue got 1 million copies printed, and now that stuff isn't worth what people expected it to be. See all the different chromium covers and cover variants of different Marvel titles. See specifically The Death of Superman, which I looked up on eBay just before I recorded this video, and people do seem to be buying it again, but people definitely thought that was a huge investment book when it came out, and now it sells, almost 30 years later for $5-10. And with that one too, there's a ton of different variants of it. And so I was thinking about it as I was driving to work, that all of those things that signified what would become the death of the comic industry at that time, because after the 90s there was a huge downtick. Comics became not as popular, books weren't selling. There's a lot of reasons for that, but one of it is people just getting so fed up isn't the word, but overwhelmed, kind of burnt out on buying so many different versions of the same book for the return on the investment that never came. All of those things that kind of signified the death of comics at that, as it was at that time, I'm seeing happen in records. I'm seeing it happen, and I think the thing that finally made it click in my brain, and I'm sure other people have made this observation, but the thing that really made it click in my brain was the different covers of this new Taylor Swift record. Now, I'm not saying she's the first to do this, because she certainly is not. Over the last year, we've seen it like crazy. But because it was covers specifically that made that connection in my brain to all the different covers that were really the variant covers of comic books in the 90s. But let's go even farther back this year and last year. Taylor Swift aside, you have the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Unlimited Love. There's like 15 color variants of that. Some of them have different covers as well. Plus, 3 weeks after it came out, there was a record store day release for it. Again, Chili Peppers, the Return of the Dream Canteen, I think there's a bunch of different versions of that. And there's a record store day Black Friday version of it coming shortly after it was released. Like, I have it in stock right now, and for some reason I'm gonna I have copies in stock that haven't sold. For some reason I'm gonna get this Black Friday version of it, just because it's slightly different. Olivia Rodrigo Sour. There was a Walmart, Target, Barnes & Noble, Best Buy, Urban Outfitters, Amazon, all these different indie exclusive, web store exclusive, probably a UK exclusive if memory serves. There had to have been a dozen different versions of that Olivia Rodrigo album. There was probably a dozen different versions of the Billie Eilish album. And those are just the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Granted, I made this connection like 10 minutes ago, so I haven't really been sitting and thinking about this for a while. But so many examples just leapt to mind immediately of records that are coming out with all of these different versions, almost all of them having the same content, but there's a different cover. I know with Olivia Rodrigo, the Target version had a different cover. There's a different color vinyl. In a few cases with Taylor Swift's new record, I believe the Target exclusive had some bonus tracks. Okay, so at least you're getting something extra out of that. Although the Record Store Day Ambassador having a Target exclusive with bonus tracks is a different subject for a different video that we won't get into. Swifties don't come for me. I'm just saying what's happening. But there's just so much saturation in the market with these big major label artists that are seeing so many different versions of the same album being released that I just can't help but think about the 90s comic book industry. The parallels are obvious, and I just can't help but think, am I going to look back on 2022 in 5-10 years and be like, oh yeah, those were all the signs that this was all going to come painfully crashing down. Granted, used or vintage records, as people call them, I mean, that market isn't quite as affected by the new stuff. Amazing Fantasy number 15 didn't go down in value necessarily because of what happened in the 90s with the comic book industry. That's still a huge book, The Butcher cover's not going to go down because they're making so many different versions of all these new records. It's just a thought that I had, and I wanted to see what everybody else thought about this. I mean, I know that me and some of the other regulars here in the shop and other record collector friends of mine do get annoyed at how many different versions of records of these records they're making. And even like gimmicky stuff like the Sleep record that had like actual pot leaves into it that didn't come with a jacket, that retailed for $150 and didn't sound good. I mean, so you see stuff like that as well. But I know some of us get annoyed with it and see it as overkill, as excessive, but I'm just curious if the vinyl community at large is feeling the same way, if you don't pay attention to it. But I do have this feeling that capitalism does what it does. It's going to push and push and push and try to grow and grow and grow and make as much money as it can until it just takes it a little bit too far, and then the bottom falls out and everybody's like, I can't do this anymore. If what record collecting is buying as many different versions of the same album as people will make, then maybe record collecting is not for me. And believe me, that's not what record collecting is, but I can see, especially this newer group of consumers that have come into the hobby post-COVID, feeling that way and getting to that point where they're just like, you know what? I have 4, 5, 6 versions of this album sitting on my shelf that I spent $40 a piece on, $30 a piece on, that I've never even opened. What am I doing? Why am I spending all my extra money on this stuff? But then again, I don't know. I could be wrong. That could not happen. Hopefully it doesn't happen for my sake. This is my career. But yeah, anyway, just a thought that I had. Not saying that it is for sure going to burst the vinyl bubble. Not saying that the industry is going to totally tank. Because colored vinyl variants have been a big thing for a long time with indie labels, for a long time. So that's not necessarily new, but the scale it's being done on, I think, is new. But anyway, those are my thoughts. If there's any part of this conversation that I missed or any nuance that I glossed over, obviously let me know in the comments, because like I said, I had this thought 10-15 minutes before I press record on this camera. This is the only take that I'm doing, just kind of getting the stream of consciousness thing out there. So leave a comment, tell me what you think about the topic, because as someone who 10 years ago worked in a comic shop and turned so many people's comic collections away because it was full of stuff that was going to go straight into the dollar book section, I I don't think a Taylor Swift or a Billie Eilish record is going to become a dollar record necessarily, but it could become a $5 or $10 record when the original value was $40, $30. You know, I don't know. Anyway, I'm just going in circles at this point. Let me know. Like the video, dislike it if you dislike what I'm saying. Tell me how you feel. That's really what this is all about, right? And subscribe, whatever. You can find us on social media at Hybrid Records TX, hybridrecordstx.com. You can look at some of our inventory and whatnot. And that's going to be it. We'll see you for the next video. Have a good weekend.